Welcome. My name is Rita Pergolizzi-Wentworth, and I'm delighted to have you all here with me this evening to talk a little bit about the Montessori education and the long and short-term effects for that on children. You know, before going any further, it's really important to know who was the scientist or the mastermind behind the Montessori model, the Montessori method. Dr. Maria Montessori was born in 1870, and she was the first female physician in her country. And why that's incredibly important is because she transferred her work into the field of education. She brought this scientific background of observation to her work. And it was because of that she was able to find certain universal truths, if you will, in the way that children developed, and also was able to basically solidify herself in history. When people hear about the Montessori philosophy, oftentimes it's synonymous with a philosophy that's withstood the test of time. You know, it's been around for generations, and there have been a number of students that have gone through this form of education and have reaped the benefits of both short and long-term gains. I'm going to actually share some of the essential components of what the model is about, and in doing so, it'll help you later on in understanding how those short and long-term effects take place, so to speak, for the child. So we're going to start off with childhood development and what it is that she actually observed in children. Maria Montessori found that children developed through 4 planes of development, or stages, if you will. And the first plane took place from 0 to 6 years old. The second was from 6 to 12. The third was 12 to 18. And then there was 18 to 24. So sorry, folks, we don't grow after, no, I'm joking. We don't. But we're going to focus in today on the 0 to 6 plane. In that, she found that there were also sensitive periods or natural inclinations to want to absorb certain types of information. So for example, she found that from 0 to 3, children wanted to make sense of the world around them through their physicality. You know, they wanted to crawl, they wanted to walk, they wanted to move their bodies. Okay. From 0 to 6, that whole window was about language. You know, they wanted to communicate. They wanted to understand, or they want, actually, not just wanted, but they want to know sounds. They want to know how to string words together to create sentences, etc. And then there was also the window for mathematics, which was from 4 to 5.5. She found that children during that time had a natural inclination to want to understand the relationship between numbers. One-to-one correspondence was important to them at that point. So then she took this, her findings, if you will, in childhood education, in childhood development and education, and she started creating a model around that. And so she started off with didactic materials, sort of similar to what you actually see here. She created the materials with those sensitive periods in mind, thinking to herself, okay, how can I help support and foster these particular interests through materials that children can construct meaning with or out of. And then she created this environment, which we call the prepared environment. So these materials lived in a place that was meant to intrigue the child, different than what you would find in the adult world. So everything in the classroom is child-sized. Everything is intended for a child to feel as though he or she can navigate the room on his or her own autonomously, really. Then she also, in her findings, she found that the teacher played a different role in a Montessori classroom. Unlike traditional philosophies at the time or even today, the focus wasn't meant or is not to be the teacher. It's supposed to be the child. The child sort of helps navigate and drive his or her education within the classroom. Equally as important, she found that the social environment was almost like another teacher, if you will. And what I mean by that is it was meant, and it is meant to be multi-age. So for example, we have something called the CASA classroom, which are students between the ages of 3 to 6. She believed that the classroom should be like a family, where the oldest child is essentially an additional teacher in the classroom, teaching materials to the younger ones, reinforcing those skills by showing a certain level of mastery. And then you have your youngest child in the family, if you will, who is looking up to the older peers in the classroom, wanting to learn more and emulate what the older children are doing. And then you have those children in between, the middle children that are sort of still, navigating their place, if you will. I'm a middle child, so I could say that. Navigating their place within the family, looking forward, to what it is that he or she will be working on, but also still having that time to solidify those skills that were just recently taught. And so what's important about this multi-age setup is that there's really no ceiling to what children can learn, but there's also no stigma either if they need a little bit more time to develop in certain areas. So why this model is so important is because the model itself, the way in which she just designed the classroom, is what actually leads to the short and long-term effects that I'm going to speak a little bit about now. There are many, but for today's talk, I'm going to focus on 3 that not only have been developed by Maria Montessori in the classroom through the use of the space, through the teacher, through children interacting with one another, but have also been researched as best practices to date, okay? So first one I'm gonna talk about is honing in on executive function skills. So executive function skills are essentially one's ability to concentrate, to sustain attention, focus, to work with one's working memory for sequencing and for ordering. And so what's happening in a Montessori classroom is that all of the time. And so what Maria Montessori did was she found that it was very important to start there. If you were able to support a child's ability to sustain focus, for example, then all other academic skills that follow would be a lot easier for him or her to absorb. So actually, to demonstrate that, I have something called the juicing work, which is one of my favorite ones. So what happens here, I'm actually going to ask for a volunteer, thank you, to count aloud the steps. So just to show and paint a picture for all of you what a 3-year-old, okay, is capable of doing, okay? And while I'm doing that, just think to yourself, like, wow, how much focus this requires of a 3-year-old to do. So we have this juicer. A child, are you ready? A child goes over to the shelf, and picks this work, okay, takes the shelf over to either a table or a mat, deciding to himself, is this a table or a mat work?
2.
From there, places it on a table, because this is actually a table work, places this on the table, gets the oranges and starts to squeeze them
4.
or juice them, takes this receptacle, pours it into the various cups,
5.
takes the cups, shares it with various friends,
6.
takes the cups back, puts it back on the tray,
7.
takes the oranges, puts them in the trash,
8.
then takes this entire tray over to a sink,
9.
washes everything off,
10.
puts everything, dries everything,
11.
puts everything back onto the tray,
12.
then takes that back over to a shelf.
13.
So it's ready for his or her friends. That's 13 steps that a 3-year-old is going to do. If a 3-year-old can do something like this and sustain his or her focus for that long, that foundation for all other learning is there. It basically transfers to other multi-step works in the classroom, not just in the classroom, but in anything in life, really. And so, for example, this is a multi-step work. It's called the bank game. And this is teaching the relationship between numbers and place value. Before a teacher will take a child to this place, for us, it's really important to know that they'll actually want to sit through it to begin with, that they're going to have that focus to start a work and then finish it, because then the child is going to actually feel much more successful in completing that process for him or herself, okay? So in the short term, what's happening in these practical life areas is that they're learning real life applications like juicing, like tonging, like tying their shoes, like origami, whatever it may be. but in the long term, it's providing them with that focus, those foundational skills to learn anything else beyond our walls. So the other area in which Maria Montessori certainly hit her mark was in multiple intelligences, now, or recognizing multiple intelligences in the didactic materials and in the way that teachers plan for the children. So, nowadays there's research specifically from a researcher named Howard Gardner on the importance of taking into account that one size does not fit all. That there are children that are kinesthetic learners or auditory learners or visual learners, whatever the case may be, and that we as educators need to be mindful of that. And Maria Montessori, hundreds of years ago, knew that. And so, she, for example, with this work, the bank game, which I alluded to before, this is an example of something that's visual, that's something that requires kinesthetic learning as well. So what I mean by that is a teacher would be sitting down with a child on the floor, this is a mat work, would be sitting down with a child and would say to a child, would put out these wooden tabs, if you will, and would state, please go and get me 2,000 from the bank. And the child has to get up, walk over to another shelf, and bring over 2 of these, let's just say. Now just picture that again as a child, okay? Not only are you seeing it, the representation of 2,000, but you're actually feeling it, okay? The long-term gains of something like that, that concrete introduction to things in life and using one's senses, and many of them, a lot of senses are being tapped into here. The long-term effects of understanding that content or that skill is really profound. It's not just them walking away with some abstract understanding of 2,000. Like, they actually are feeling it and weighing it with their hands. Another area in which Maria Montessori's classrooms thrive, and where you'll see in mission statements in Montessori schools probably all around the world, is in fostering independence. I guarantee if you did any search of Montessori schools, that word will come up. And the reasoning behind it is that she believed that with that environment that I had spoken about, that prepared environment, with the prepared teacher, that we were helping children with these skills that they can manipulate on their own that would then internalize their sense of inner control. So the idea here is that if they can control their outer environment, for example, placing their belongings away or taking care of themselves when they go to the mirror or learning how to even, a toilet on their own. If they're able to see this cause and effect over and over and over again, that they have this power over what it is that they're manipulating and doing, that'll eventually transfer into inner self-regulation. And so, the power of that, and what I often speak to parents about when their children have left Montessori schools, is that they leave with a very strong sense of self, a strong sense of self-regulation and self-advocacy. And it's simply because they've internalized what it was that they were doing with their outside world. Now, I've spoken a bit about these, again, I've only highlighted 3 areas in which she was very ahead of her time, and which have withstood the test of time. And what's equally important is that with fostering independence, with those honing in of executive function skills, and with multiple intelligences, this is the way of the future. This is the now. She created this model over 100 years ago, but it's by far one of the most current things out there. It is, with all the research that exists, it's certainly what's preparing our children to be well poised to be those, self-driven entrepreneurs that start projects and complete them. That gift that Montessori education gives children is really something that I don't even think she knew would last for this long. Okay. So I'm going to open the floor for any questions that you might have. I know I've just given you lots of information. Does anybody?
So what is it that teachers are observing?
In Montessori, observation is by our way of assessing children. And what I mean by that is when Dr. Maria Montessori herself started her practice, she observed children devoid of judgment, almost like a doctor does when a doctor meets you. You know, they're not thinking to themselves, I like this person or I don't like this person. They're asking you for what you're feeling. And in the classroom, what teachers are doing is they're looking at a child's behavior. What are they saying and what are they doing? And then from those observations, a teacher decides his or her next steps for the next day, or even in that moment in time. It's like, okay, I've recognized that the child, because of these behaviors, has a certain need. And so now what materials can I plug in to help that child move from here to the next area in the scope and sequence, or just social, in terms of social emotional learning, whatever the case may be. So that's what a teacher is constantly thinking about.
How does this differ from other philosophies, like the Reggio approach?
So the Montessori approach is constructivist, meaning that you're constructing meaning through basically being, through living, through manipulating. And so there are other philosophies similar to that. Reggio is one of them, as you had mentioned. But the difference is that Maria Montessori not only created the theory, but she also created the practical steps that a teacher would need. So I often say to people, she didn't just talk the talk, she walked the walk. Like, she took it all the way. And it's the only philosophy that really does that in the constructivist world, so to speak. So with regards to the difference with the Reggio approach, so Maria Montessori started her model, if you will, around 1900s or so. Reggio came about after World War II, and it looked to the Montessori approach to gain a lot of what its model is like. Okay, and it's different in that it's more social based. So in Montessori world, so to speak, these materials themselves are like teachers. They're self-correcting, meaning that if a teacher presents this lesson to a child, he or she will then walk away and let the child manipulate it on his or her own, and there's a control of error. Whereas with the Reggio approach, it's more social-based, where there's lots more, I guess you could say, interactions with the teachers and the students to construct meaning. So it's considered a social constructivist approach.
Hi, could you please explain a little what the older children are doing in the classroom?
So as I mentioned before, the older children, you know, they're the teachers also in the classroom. Not only do they continuously receive lessons from the teachers to move them to where they need to be or where they can go, so to speak, but they're also reinforcing those skills through the teaching of that content to the younger one. They often say that the third year is the culminating year of a Montessori cycle, because that older child has taken everything that he or she has learned throughout and is really kind of debuting it in that final year. So it's really, really powerful for children to walk away with that. Okay, thank you.